Latin America holds fundamental female liberation across its revolutionary movements throughout its rich history. These empowerments hold themselves as beacons of hope and guidance for our modern-day female mobilization and political roles. The Mexican Revolution's courageous soldaderas, to Cuba's brave guerrillas, Argentina's wise female politicians, and the spirited socialists of Chile form the basis of women's rights. Their refusal to stay as mere victims of their challenges showed through them taking part in upholding and advocating using politics, revolutionary movements, and solidarity to face these systems. The veiled voices of women uncover themselves across Latin American history. In spite of being sidelined, their roles in revolutions, grassroots movements, and political positions showcase Latin Americans, Mexicans, Chilenas, Cubanas, and Argentina's leadership. They established and challenged systems of oppression and became pillars of hope for future female generations. To understand women of later revolutions, especially the soldaderas of Mexico, we first have to look at the deeper structures of race, gender, and resilience that formed during the colonial period. Looking back during this time explains how history shaped the possibilities for women's political action. The colonial systems used race, religion, and gender to create hierarchies. Women, specifically indigenous, African, and mixed-raced women, were placed at the bottom of colonial society, defined by the ideas of limpieza de sangre, or purity of blood. As María Elena Martínez explains, women's bodies became the symbolic place where racial purity was either guarded or violated. This produced centuries of surveillance, restriction, and gendered violence that shaped women's political possibilities well into the 19th and 20th centuries. These colonial structures didn't disappear. Instead, they created revolutions of future women. In the article, Zumbi of Palmares, challenging the Portuguese colonial order, it covers how Afro-descendant and indigenous communities actively resisted colonial order. Mary Karash's study of Palmares shows how escaped slaves created a sovereign community that defined Portuguese rule for nearly a century.
Northeastern Brazil. It was founded and led by people escaping from slavery, also called Maroons. In fact, it was one of the world's largest Maroon communities, its population reaching beyond 10,000, and its citizens were at constant war with colonial forces.
The video from Jimenez and Gomez emphasizes Zumbi as both a political leader and a symbol of Afro-Brazilian autonomy, which serves as a reminder that even under extreme oppression, people built their own forms of freedom. Other sources, such as the Tupac Amaru and Castellina rebellions, revealed deep organized resistance which showed how forced labor created revolts. It also showed how rebels linked indigenous and Afro-descendant liberation. They revealed in the Confession of Michelle de Cervantes a woman at the center of military planning and mobilization. Her leadership demonstrates that before modern revolutions, women were already politically involved through means of organization. These sources show a clear pattern of how colonial, racial, and gender hierarchies restricted women's agency. But indigenous, Afro-descendant, and mixed-race women continuously resisted. This long history is important to understand revolutionary women later in history. By the time of Mexican Revolution in the 20th century, women were not entering politics for the first time. They were carrying centuries of survival, defiance, and leadership from Palmares to Michelle Pantas to the unarmed women in those communities. It is this exact legacy of restriction and rebellion that the soldaderas inherited. Their participation in the Mexican Revolution is another older history of how women challenged the structures that tried to control them. Of independence. It being said they were always under a man, from father to husband, and if a woman didn't have a man in her life, then she would be under the church, where the priest would care for them. This was a necessary system for Mexicans during the times, as legally women could not have property and accounts in their own name. They would have to have a man sign for them in order to even open their own bank accounts. That is why during the Mexican Revolution, women felt immense amount of freedom, that level being compared to that of prostitutes. As a single woman had freedom to follow any man she wanted, dance with whoever she wanted, and care for whoever she wanted. Some other women didn't really have a voice in the matter of joining in the war or not, these women being dragged along with their husbands. During the war, women had the expectations of caring for the soldiers, themselves, and the children's needs. Such expectations including arriving at the battle's campgrounds before the men to set up tents and make the meals for their arrival. Some women cared for the people's wounds, taking on the additional responsibility to look over their children that were also dragged along. Following the men through thick and thin, they were resilient and cared for all their soldiers. Some women, like Petra Herrera, became a soldier herself. She hid her own gender. She became a captain and built many connections. She was well established in the military force, and near the end she revealed her gender for everyone to know. And for her strong standing within the military, she was awarded command of an all-woman regime and led them to winning many more victories. These women, who were involved in the war, gained their own name. They were called las soldaderas, or las Adelitas. They had songs and paintings made for them, and they were romanticized and said that what they did was for the men that they loved. Their roles were minimized in order to protect the men's ego. The Mexican men could not stand how women presented themselves and were gaining this form of individuality. Maybe not a direct attempt, but they fell in love and began to claim which woman was theirs so that no other men could attempt to start a relationship with them. The women were proud to be called a man's woman. In record of this movement, the women were photographed, written songs, and painted, their stories being passed down by word of mouth, as many Mexicans were illiterate. By consequence of these stories being passed down, you may hear different versions that people have told and sung. Even during the war, the songs that people would sing would be rearranged and called their own originals. Songs like La Adelita that were written and sung during the Mexican Revolution and were not officially released until around the 1940s. La Adelita had been rearranged, and upon searching, I even found 3 different versions of the songs that showed different people's perspectives of Las Adelitas, all under the same name. Political and military action throughout the revolution and path towards socialism in Chile and Cuba during the 1950s and 1970s was an era where women established structures designed to challenge systems, fund organizations, and test social norms. They accomplished this by moving forward to create equality, education, and justice. Their contributions help us understand women in grassroots movements, women at the front foot of mass mobilization, and what social change is utilized to change systems of oppression through analyzing the path to socialism and revolution. The Cuban Revolution mothered a culture of pride, strength, and resilience for its revolutionary leaders and those women after them. Haiti Santa Maria represented this by becoming a leading light of the Cuban Revolution and one of the most influential Latin American female politicians in Cuba. Despite her limited education and her humble beginnings, it did not stop her from reaching heights of success. Santa Maria played a role in an ataque al cuartel Moncada. This attack was an initial start of the revolution. Though the attack was unsuccessful, she continued to engage and aimed to include women in the forefront of any military action to showcase their resilience and courage. After the revolution, one of her greatest achievements was founding the Casa de las Americanas. Her determination to unite intellectuals and artists to convey cultural art to the Cuban public, and her organization became one of the most important art institutes of Latin America.
Una de sus obras más grandes, Casa de las Américas. Hoy no se puede hablar de Casa de las Américas si no se habla de Aide Santa María. Hoy Aide Santa María camina por Casa de las Américas. Fue capaz de aglutinar a lo mejor de la intelectualidad latinoamericana. Dio a conocer la revolución cubana entre los intelectuales latinoamericanos, cuando una revolución que estaba asediada y ella fue capaz de unir, pero además fue capaz de sentarse y de ser una intelectual más.
Another leading role in female mobilization was Celicia Sanchez. Sanchez was a passionate believer that understood the concept that the pueblo in Cuba was an essential part of the leading revolution. Celicia found her place within the revolution as a soldier of the Metela. With her intelligence and understanding of logistics, she gained an influential role within the guerrillas of the revolution. Sanchez, even in the face of ruthless and dangers ahead, embarked through her time in the Metela, strengthening her belief in Cuba's pueblos. It drove her to establish educational institutions for children and young youth of Cuba. She became a strong advocate for education, helping develop programs that shaped future generations of Cubans, embracing the belief that supporting young citizens of Cuba will set its foundation for success. The roadmap to Cuba's revolution created for women's roles within mobilization can be seen through Chile's road to socialism. It was a difficult and complicated achievement, and to understand this, we must go over the definition of socialism. Socialism is an economic and social belief of collective collaboration towards rights or properties within a political system or power structure. Chile's rise to socialism began under the dictator Augusto Pinochet, who ruled with a corrupt and murderous imperialist hand, starting as Chile's military general who led Chilean armed forces to overthrow then-president of Chile, Salvador Allende. The years under his rule became an oppressive time for women in Chile. Despite this did not deter the women of Chile who sought justice from his dictatorship. Journalist Monica Gonzalez, a noble leader of this activism while in prison under Pinochet, is a reminder of this resistance. Through her journalism, she delivered vital evidence of Pinochet's internal military scheme during the overthrow of President Allende. This was in the form of an audio tape of the military's communist action of the day of Combatant 1973. Gonzalez's persistence to uncover the terrors of Pinochet's regime was accomplished, and because of this, Gonzalez represents Allende's powerful words through her brave journalism.
Me dirijo sobre todo a la modesta mujer de nuestra tierra, a la campesina que creyó en nosotros, a la obrera que trabajó más, a la madre que supo nuestra preocupación por los niños.
The translation to English reads, I address above all the modest women of our land, the campanista who believed in us, the worker who labored more, the mother who knew our concern for our children. Despite being imprisoned and forced down, she symbolizes the worker who labored more, and the mother who sought justice for the parents whose activist children were killed and murdered for their bravery and courage. Across Latin American history, women's labor shaped political change, even when official and governmental narratives pushed them to the sidelines. In the 19th century, Argentina nation-building projects by Sarmiento and Alberdi imagined a modern state centered on elite men. Their writing promoted European immigration, civilization, and progress, yet they excluded indigenous, Afro-Argentinian, and working-class women from the nation's image, despite their essential roles in sustaining households and farm life. Women were politically invisible. By the early 20th century, industrialization brought women into factories and workshops. As Peter Wynne describes, women workers became critical to labor, militarization, organization strikes, sustaining community networks, and often being the backbone of working-class activism. Their economic contributions made them more visible in public life. Under Peronism, women emerged as powerful political actors. Daniel James explains how everyday working-class women shaped Peronist identity through neighborhood work, union involvement, and social welfare networks. With Evita Perón's leadership and the creation of Peronist women's parties, women gained new political identities and were still limited by gender norms, but publicly more recognized than ever before.
Peronism permeated and penetrated all aspects of Argentine life, from the church to the public schools, from the football pitch to the radio waves, becoming the hegemonic discourse through which supporters viewed their world and dissidents shaped their critiques.
Across these eras, women's labor, whether domestic, industrial, or political, was consistently foundational, yet undervalued. Whether they were absent from nation-building ideas or central to populist movements, women reshaped Argentina's political landscape from the ground up. The rise of contemporary feminist movements across Latin America are more prevalent than ever. From the soldaderas to women in Chile, Cuba, Argentina, and across Latin America leads directly to where we are today. In Mexico, the rise of Martínez and Juárez during the 1990s started a national feminist movement. Mothers, students, and activists demanded answers, being the only voices that were willing to advocate against the state that was dismissing the killings of women. In Cuba, a special period pushed women's labor, health, and safety into a crisis. Feminist groups emerged to address domestic violence and economic inequality, often working quietly within the community organizations. In Argentina, the early 2000s economic collapse created new activist groups. These women are ones behind the Ni Una Menos movement, inspired by the murder of 14-year-old Chiara Pérez. The movement uses mass marches, digital activism, and testimonies to protest feminicides, abortion restrictions, and state compliance and gender violence. And in Chile, after Pinochet's dictatorship, women's movements came back with force. They fought for reproductive rights, education reform, and protection against abuse, laying in the groundwork for today's massive feminist student protests. These modern movements, born from crisis, courage, and community, are the newest stories of a much older story of the ongoing fight for gender justice in Latin America. From each of these places, Mexico, Cuba, Argentina, and Chile, women refused to be victims. They created political strategies, ran networks, and sustained revolutionary communities. Mexicanas, Chilenas, Argentinas, and Cubanas not only confronted systems of oppression, but built new possibilities. Their solidarity created a model for future generations of activists, politicians, and feminists alike.